We used to live just by the corner shop. Me and my mum used to go there when she wanted her groceries. She used to get bacon, which was sliced and then weighed. And I remember the potatoes, different back then, they were put into small boxes and wrapped up, and the sugar was also weighed out and then put into blue plastic bags. I remember Mum used to cut out her tokens, the ration tokens, to pay the shopkeeper. And I said, oh, Mum, can I have some sweets? And she always used to say, no, next week. And, I didn't like that. I was 5 then, and, that corner shop, it's changed now. It's not like it was then.
Yes. There were always queues. My grandmother would always have her ration books ready for when she went shopping. And I would stand and watch her chatting to the assistant and asking for her groceries. I remember her asking for a loaf of bread. It was a huge loaf. It wasn't sliced, and it was a huge loaf of bread. We took it home and sliced the bread using a sharp knife, and then we buttered the bread. Today, you don't have to do that, as the bread is already sliced. It's so nice to eat.
I remember when we got the ration books, which was something new. We had the ration tokens for food and the coupons for clothing. We didn't get much. It was quite poor, really. The wife knows more about the food side of things. We used to get a slither of butter and an egg each. What else do we used to get? Or bread, yeah. We used to get a small loaf, and it's a bit black, really. I think that was because of the flour. And a number of things. The wife knows. She knows everything about that side of things, really. For clothing, you had 1 coupon for a tie. Trousers, there were about 5 coupons. You had to be careful, You couldn't spend them all at once. You had different months. You had like May and then coupons for June. And my mother, she used to say to me, be careful, don't use them all, don't cut them all out. Because, if you want a coat or something, you need 7 coupons. And you wouldn't have much left then. Yeah. It was 1939, November the 3rd, that's when the war started. I remember, it was in deaf school, the kids were all up in the dorm and I was there. We was in bed and the sirens would go off and the teachers would come in and wake us all up and said, come on, follow us. The planes are coming. So we'd all scurry down the stairs and we'd need to go into the cellar. We'd go into the cellar and it smelt, had the vaulted ceilings and it's quite damp and musty. There was, rugs on the floor with straw, shoved underneath, and that's what we used to lay down and sleep on. We had pillows and stuff as well. The teacher said, be quiet and be still. I remember the smell, and I said to him next to me, I said, whew, didn't it stink? And we waited, and the teacher said, oh, I can hear something, I can hear them. And I thought to myself, really? I didn't know whether to believe them or not. She said, yeah, they're coming, the planes are coming. I wasn't sure. And then they'd say, oh, there's a bomb going off. I didn't know if there was a bomb or not. And then in the end, it was all got quiet, and then we sort of surfaced and went outside, and the teacher said, look, come over here. And there was the school, and the front by the door, all the glass had been blown out. Couldn't believe it. And they said it was because of the bomb, and just behind the school, there was the hospital. We didn't go there, that's where hearing people went. But all the front was all blown out. There was glass and bricks and rubble everywhere. I thought, oh dear, blimey. And the teacher said, you deaf children are very lucky you was underneath in the cellar, because the bomb blast come from the side, and if you was in the dorm, then God knows what would have happened.
At the sound of the sirens, they were really loud. We would have to make our way down into the basement. We'd sit round in a circle on the floor, and we'd have the children and they'd wrap them round in blankets, and the teacher would give out some sweeties. I think there were pear drops that we had, and they were really enjoyable. We'd sit there very quietly, it was very dark. And then just as we were getting ready to go up, we wouldn't go back to sleep because we'd been down in the basement for 4 hours. But we'd make our way up, get ourselves ready, and we noticed that all the windows had been painted black as there was the blackout.
I can remember when I was a little girl, it was night time and we had to run into the air raid shelter. The following morning, people were crying in tears and appeared very upset because the Royal Hospital had been bombed. All the children got dressed and walked over to have a look. The hospital had been demolished,
It was at
and
the
there
school.
had been fatalities. Everyone was busy looking for the injured. We stood and stared at the ruins. It was so sad. People were talking and crying, and then we had to go back home.
We all had to wear protected gas masks that caused difficulty in breathing as they were securely fastened on our heads. Everybody had to wear them and they all looked like pigs. It was well funny.
Yeah, we had the boxes for the gas masks. You know, the ones we used to put over our head. And before we went out, my mother used to give them to me and my sister. We'd make sure she put them over our shoulders. And my sister went to a hearing school we used to wear them all the time. We had the boxes just by our sides and strapped over our shoulders. It was quite hard boxes, they had a lid on with a little catch. And the gas masks, it smelled of rubber when you put them on. Yeah. And there was the snout and the gauze at the front. Other people had the ones with the flaps on the snout, but we had the new ones with the gauze.
Gas masks were black and of a cylindrical shape. They had grey webbing straps around the front. The eyepiece was made of a plastic perspex and the mask was strapped around the head. The front of the mask fitted across the front of the face and it had a gauze lining.
I said to my brother Bert, do you want to go to the deaf club tonight? We've got our bikes so we could cycle up. He said yeah, so it was getting quite dark at that time, so we jumped on the bikes and I said, you go in the inside, Bert, you'd be safer there. So we was pedalling along and we had the lights on, but they were half capped, so they didn't show the full beam. All the lights in the streets were out. Couldn't see anything, apart from there was one light in the distance. When we got a bit closer, we realised it was a bus. And even their front headlamps were capped. There was the railway bridge and we was cycling underneath and it was quite a steep hill, so we was pedalling quite hard, and because of that the bikes were rocking from side to side, and therefore the beams for the lamps were too. There was a policeman at the top and he said, stop right there. And he said, oh, I know your father. And he said, you want to be careful because the planes will see you with the lamps swaying from side to side with the beams showing. And I said, well, we was going up the hill. We couldn't help but pedal fast and hard. He said, well, you're going to have to walk from now on. So we did. He said, off you go. And that was it. I remember the Second World War started in 1940. Just before then, November the 3rd in 1939, that's when I was born. At that time, there was the blackouts. There was no lights in the street because of the war. My mother was in labour that night and the ambulance come. My father couldn't drive, so he jumped in the front of the ambulance and then they went to the hospital, the Royal Hospital, and that's where I was born. These cards here, we had to use them for work, and if we went to the railway or... They checked to see if you was a spy. They used to have Germans fly over and parachute down from the planes, so a lot of people used to be arrested because they didn't have the ID cards. If we went to work, they'd ask you for your ID and you had to show it then. And they'd go, yep, that's fine, off you go. Even in the pictures, you had to show it. Anywhere you went, really, the railway station, if they thought you looked a bit dodgy, they'd ask you for your ID. And that's why we had them, these ID cards. Yeah, look. Mm-hmm. During the war, my parents worked then. My father had 2 jobs, one in the night at a factory, Henry Meadows factory. And they used to make tanks there, and that was my father's job there. He used to work there for 10 hours, come home and sleep for a couple of hours, and then he was a home guard then, looking out for the aeroplanes with the searchlights. My mother, she also worked in the factory making ammunitions. I remember my Aunt Dolly, she used to live just by the fish and chip shop. She used to come round to look after me and my sister when we were small. Yeah. Yeah, I remember we was at home one day, just pottering around, and this chap come up the street, this hearing chap, and knocked on the door and said to me and my brother Bert, would you like to come and help us with some firewood, chopping of wood? We said, oh, yeah, all right then. So, he said, well, come on then, off you come. And where our home was, it was on the lower end of the street, and up the top was the cinema. And you used to go round by the right then, up to the farm. So we left home and we walked up towards the farm. We went through the gates and we realised this is where horses were kept before, because there were the stables along the side. And we thought, oh, we're chopping firewood here. And I said to Bert, oh, you can smell there's been horses here before. There's still, the smell still stayed there. And they wanted to chop firewood for selling. So he said, well, look at me and I'll show you what to do. So he goes, I'll chop the wood and then you put it in bundles and then wrap it round with this wire. So after he showed us, we'd see what he's done, and then we did the same. So we've got the wood together and then we put the wire around it. And he said to us, I'm just going to get the horse and cart. I'm just going to bring that along. So you carry on with what you're doing, because there was plenty of wood. And I said to Bert, I think I can hear a noise. I think it's the sirens. And the chap had already gone. And then we panicked then, we ran from the farm all the way back home. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us. And we ran through to the garden, and my mum was putting up the laundry. She was hanging it out in the garden. And we ran into the shelter and locked the door. And my mum come in and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I said, it's the sirens, Mum, it's the sirens. She said, no, they're practising. And we ran all the way back for nothing. And I said, well, how can you tell the difference then, Mum? She said, well, the slow intermittent noise, that's when the planes are coming. But the long drawn out one, that's when it's clear. And we thought, oh, we did laugh. I remember we'd be sat round the radio, listening to the news, and then the air raid sirens would go off. My father was out this time, and we'd run down to the cellar. Me, my mum and my sister would shut the door. We'd all sit down there, huddled round each other. My sister one side, my mum the other. And my mum had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and there was the smoke rising up. I remember that clearly. And I heard the planes going over, and then it crashed. It crashed in Fowler's Park. Big crash it was. Yeah. And then when that was finished, we'd go up, and then next time the sirens went off, we'd run down again. It happened again and again. My father was a policeman, He wore his policeman's helmet. And he'd say, oh, I'm going out on the beat now, I'm going to look around Wolverhampton. He'd say, oh, they'll be coming. No, sorry, he didn't say that. He said, I'm going out to have a look around. And we'd be up in bed, it was night time. And I remember, again, the planes would go over, and this one time, I was hoeing around. I said to my brother, come on, we've got to get out. We've got to go into the shelter. And he said, that daft Hitler. He goes, I'm not getting out of bed. I've got work in the morning. And he went back to sleep. And I thought he was going to get killed anyway. I left him, and I scurried outside. We went into the shelter out back. And the neighbours would also be in there. They'd have their part of the shelter, their side. And I said to me mum, Hubert's upstairs. He's still in bed. And she said, oh, leave him. So we waited, and they'd all be listening. The planes would go over. It was 1940, And anyway, the planes would go over, and again, they'd be waiting. We'd all be waiting. They'd be listening out, waiting for the bombs to drop. Anyway, they passed over towards Birmingham way, the planes. And I remember my father, the policeman, he come in, he said, come on, it's all over now. He goes, come out. So me, my brother, my mum and everyone else got out. I said to Dad, what's that red glow in the sky? What's that? They said, they've bombed Birmingham. Birmingham, I thought. We're in Wolverhampton, it's only a stone's throw away. There was this red cloud, this smoke in the sky. Whew, it was bad.
The following day there was another bomb attack amongst the village, which devastatingly killed a number of sheep and cows. It was such a shame. My sister and I went to have a look and saw a plane shot down by a soldier. The plane crashed into the field, and so we went to have a look. We saw that the plane was German, as it had a swastika on the side. There was no survivors.
A lot of the evacuees were deaf, and some were hearing. And as there was too many of them, there were 2 to each bed. Do you remember?
Yes.
We had to have 2 to each bed. There were about 32 girls who were separated away from the boys. Normally I would have the bed to myself, but now there were not enough beds. We had to share. The evacuees came from London because of the bombings, and they came to stay at my school, the Mount School for the Deaf. It was something we had to put up with, although I wasn't very keen on sharing. I would go home for the holidays, and when I returned, the evacuees were still there. I would say they stayed with us for about 18 months before they moved away, and it was so comfortable to have my own bed back.
There was 4 Italian prisoners of war who came to help on the farm, and they lived in a cottage. Their roles were to work out on the farm, and every morning they would bring their rationing books with them. They would want sweets, sugar, butter. They would sometimes ask for more, but we wouldn't allow that. They would go back to their cottage and cook for themselves, and sometimes they would come back and ask for more, but we would tell them that they would have to come the following morning. Some of the Italian prisoners of war were caught fighting with the farm labourers. We would have to phone the sergeant, and he would come and exchange the prisoners with other prisoners of war. Those who were caught fighting would be taken back to camp for punishment. Another lady and I were in the kitchen preparing the vegetables for dinner. The lady would make the gravy and place it into 2 jugs upon the dinner table, and we would wait for them to arrive. When serving dinner, someone asked for the gravy, but it turned out that one of the prisoners of war had only gone and drunk the gravy. How terrible was that?
It was the end of the war and it was VE Day. All the families, everyone was out in the streets celebrating. Finally, it was VE Day. And I remember it was a week or 2 later, and I was coming home from school, and I saw over the other side of the road the workmen drilling up the streets. I thought, I want to have a look, so I ran over, and I got hit by a car. I could hear the drilling, I remember that, but I didn't hear the car coming, and that's how I became deaf.
I can remember the teacher telling us that the war was finally over.
It was June the 6th, I remember.
But the teacher told us to be careful in case there were any Germans who were trying to escape. I think they may have been the SS. The teacher told us we'd be going out on a coach trip, and excitedly we all piled onto the coaches. And the coaches were full. You looked behind and all you could see were coaches and a line of taxis.
It was 1945 and we had our VE Day celebrations. A lady told us we were to go to a nearby village to see the celebrations. There were flags everywhere. I truly enjoyed it. There were flags flying in the street and the children joining the celebrations. Then I met my sister there and she won the beauty queen competition. It was such a surprise, especially to win on VE Day. It was fantastic.